Someone call the constable. This filthy sweeper just stole the Duke's ring. The manager's scream echoed through the crowded grocery store as every head turned toward the young woman in the faded grey dress. Elena stood frozen in the middle of the aisle, the gold signet ring swinging from the chain around her neck, glittering under the morning light for all to see. Customers gasped. Cashiers smirked. The manager was already reaching for her arm, and that was the exact moment the doors burst open and the Duke of Ravenshollow himself walked in. What he said next made the entire store go silent and left the manager begging on her knees. But to understand how a simple cleaner brought the most powerful man in the county running through those doors, we have to go back to where it all began. Every morning, at exactly 6 o'clock, before the first light touched the rooftops of Ashford Lane, Elena appeared at the doors of Whitmore's grocery with a broom in her hand. To everyone who saw her, she was nothing more than a random village girl. Her dress was plain cotton, faded from too many washes. Her shoes were worn at the heels, and her dark hair was tied back with a ribbon that had long lost its color. She owned nothing that sparkled, nothing that demanded a second glance. And that was exactly how she wanted it. But there was something about Elena that no faded dress could hide. It was in the way she greeted the delivery boys by name, the way she slipped an extra apple to the hungry child near the fruit stand, the way she never raised her voice, even when others raised theirs at her. She was humble in a way that confused people, and kind in a way that made the cruel ones uncomfortable. The customers who mocked her called her Cinderella. The staff called her the sweeper. Not one of them ever thought to ask why a simple cleaner carried herself with the quiet grace of a woman who had nothing to prove. They did not know about the ring she kept hidden beneath her collar, or that the crest engraved on it belonged to the Duke of Ravenshollow, the man who owned the grocery store, the street it stood on, and half the county beyond it. And they certainly did not know that 1 year ago, in a private ceremony witnessed only by the morning sun, Elena had become his wife. It had been her idea, not his. Before taking her place as Duchess, Elena wanted to walk among her husband's people as one of them. She wanted to see how workers were treated when no one important was watching, and how kindness survived or died in the places the Duke's reports never reached. So she made him promise not to interfere for 1 full year, no matter what she endured. She traded silk for cotton, carriages for cold morning walks, and her title for a broom. What she discovered inside that store would test her patience and expose a rot that had been hiding in plain sight for years. Because while Elena swept the floors, someone else was sweeping money out of the workers' pockets and treating every soul beneath her like dirt. The people who laughed at the girl in the faded grey dress had no idea that with every insult, they were writing their own ending. The woman they mocked for sweeping the Duke's grocery store every single morning was not just married to the Duke. She was the storm, quietly waiting for the perfect moment to arrive.
A small favor that means everything. If you're enjoying these stories, please take a second to subscribe to the channel. It costs you nothing, but it means the world to me. Right now, I can't monetize this channel because I haven't reached the required number of subscribers. Your subscription brings me one step closer to keeping these stories coming and creating even better content for you. Thank you for watching, supporting, and being part of this journey. Please subscribe, like, and share. You can truly make a difference.
Chapter 2. To understand what happened in that grocery store, you first have to understand the people inside it, because every one of them was about to be tested, and not all of them would survive the truth. Elena carried her dignity the way other women carried jewelry, quietly and without effort. 3 months into her time at Whitmore's, she had been splashed by carriage wheels, blamed for broken jars she never touched, and made to scrub the same floor twice simply because Margot enjoyed watching her kneel. Yet she never once snapped, never once wept where anyone could see. At night, in the small rented room she kept above the bakery, she wrote everything down in a leather journal, every stolen wage, every falsified ledger, every cruelty, not with anger, but with the careful patience of a woman building a case. Her kindness was not weakness, it was discipline. She had promised herself that when the day of reckoning came, it would not be revenge. It would be justice. And there is a difference. Miles away, in the cold stone halls of Ravenshollow Estate, Duke Adrian Blackwood was fighting a very different battle, the battle to keep his word. Adrian was a man whose single signature could close a business, end a career, or change a law. And yet the one thing he could not do was protect his own wife from a floor manager in a grocery store. Every week, his steward placed reports on his desk, and every week, Adrian read between the lines and saw Elena's suffering hidden inside polite language. His servants noticed how his jaw tightened, how he rode his horse harder than usual, how he stood at the window each morning at 6 o'clock, staring in the direction of Ashford Lane. His power was a storm held behind a dam, and the dam was a promise. That is the rarest kind of strength, not the power to act, but the power to wait. And then there was Margot Price. Margot had clawed her way up from cashier to floor manager, and somewhere along that climb, she decided that the only way to feel tall was to make everyone else feel small. She skimmed coins from the stock boy's wages and called it a handling fee. She rewrote inventory numbers and pocketed the difference. She had perfected the art of smiling at the powerful and spitting on the powerless. And in Elena, she believed she had found the perfect victim, a poor, plain village girl with no family, no connections, and no way to fight back. Margot's greatest talent was reading people's status. Her fatal flaw was that she could not read their hearts. Around these three, the rest of the store arranged itself like mirrors, each one reflecting a choice. Ruth, the youngest cashier, was the quiet conscience of the store. She never joined the mockery, and more than once she stayed behind to help Elena stack shelves, whispering, "Don't let them get to you." Ruth had covered shifts for a sick co-worker for 3 weeks without pay and never complained. Proof that kindness can survive even in a poisoned place. Mr. Hobbs, the store director, was the opposite kind of mirror. Not evil, but empty. He saw everything and chose to see nothing, hiding in his office behind paperwork while Margot ruled the floor, because confronting her would have required courage he did not have. And Lady Fenwick, the wealthy customer who swept through the aisles like she owned them, represented everyone who believes that a person's worth is stitched into the fabric of their clothes. She looked at Elena's faded dress and saw a servant. She never once looked at her eyes. Cruelty, cowardice, kindness, and quiet strength, all of them under one roof, circling each other every single morning. All that was missing was a spark, and the spark was coming, carried in on the heels of a spoiled young lady, a shattered display of preserves, and a lie that would finally force Elena to say the one word Margot never expected to hear from her: no. Chapter 3. The trouble began the way trouble always begins: small, quiet, and easy to ignore. It was a Tuesday morning when Elena noticed young Tom, the stock boy, counting his weekly wages behind the storage room with tears in his eyes. His pay envelope was 2 shillings short. Again. When he gathered the courage to ask Margot about it, she smiled that thin, poisonous smile of hers and said, "Handling fee, boy. Be grateful you're paid at all." Tom was 14 years old. He was saving those shillings to buy medicine for his mother. That night, Elena's journal gained its first entry written in a trembling hand. She began to watch, truly watch, and once she started looking, she saw it everywhere. Margot marked crates of flour as damaged and sold them out the back door for her own pocket. She docked Daisy's pay for laughing too loudly, docked Ruth's pay for helping a confused elderly customer too long, and rewrote the ledgers so smoothly that Mr. Hobbs signed them without ever lifting his eyes from his tea. The store was bleeding, and the wound was hidden behind the manager's perfect penmanship. So Elena did the one thing no one expected a cleaner to do. She wrote a complaint to the Duke's estate. She signed it with a single letter, E, and dropped it into the estate's petition box at dawn, her hood pulled low. Then she wrote another, and another. 12 letters over 3 months, each one calm, precise, and devastating, listing dates, amounts, and names. She never asked for rescue. She never mentioned herself. Every letter ended with the same line: "These workers deserve better." What Elena did not know was that miles away, Her husband had recognized her handwriting from the very first envelope. Adrian sat in his study each week, reading his wife's careful reports by candlelight, his fist clenched around promises that grew heavier with every page. Twice he ordered his carriage prepared. Twice he sent it back to the stables. A promise was a promise. But he began quietly building a file of his own, cross-checking her claims against the store's official ledgers, watching the lies pile up like kindling waiting for a match. Inside the store, the humiliations sharpened. Margot could not explain why, but the sweeper unsettled her. Elena never groveled, never flinched, and there is nothing a bully hates more than a victim who refuses to break. So Margot pushed harder. She accidentally kicked over Elena's wash bucket and made her mop the same aisle 3 times in front of laughing customers. She forced her to clean the storage cellar in the dark because lamps cost money. She began whispering to Mr. Hobbs that the cleaner was stealing, planting seeds for a firing she was already planning. And still, every morning at 6 o'clock, Elena unlocked those doors and began to sweep, her chin level, her hidden ring resting against her heart like a quiet promise. Then came the morning that changed everything. Lady Fenwick swept into the store with her daughter, a spoiled young woman in pink silk, who ran her gloved finger along the shelves like an inspector. Near the preserves display, the girl spun carelessly to admire her own reflection in the window, and her elbow sent the entire pyramid of jars crashing to the floor. Glass and plum preserves exploded across the aisle. For one heartbeat, there was silence. Then the girl pointed at Tom, the stock boy, and said the words that lit the fuse. "That clumsy boy pushed me." Elena had watched it all from 10 feet away, broom in hand. She could have stayed silent. Silence had protected her secret for nearly a year. But she looked at Tom's terrified face, the same boy who was still 2 shillings short for his mother's medicine, and she stepped forward. The boy was nowhere near her, she said, her voice calm and carrying. "Your daughter knocked the display over herself. I saw it." The store went still. Lady Fenwick's face turned the color of the spilled preserves. By afternoon, she had returned with her complaint, and Margot seized the moment like a starving woman seizing bread. She dragged Mr. Hobbs from his office and staged the execution in the middle of the store, in front of every customer and employee, because cruelty always craves an audience. "Apologize to Lady Fenwick," Hobbs ordered, avoiding Elena's eyes. Elena set down her broom slowly, deliberately, and gave her answer, "No." The word landed like a slap. Margot's face lit up with vicious joy. "Then you're finished, fired. Leave the apron and get out, and forget this week's wages. Consider them a fine for your insolence." Elena reached for the ties of her apron with steady hands, but as she lifted it over her head, fate finally ran out of patience. The apron strap caught the chain around her neck, and the heavy gold signet ring swung free into the light, spinning slowly, its engraved crest flashing for the entire store to see. Lady Fenwick's teacup-perfect composure shattered. "That crest," she whispered, gripping a shelf, "that is the Ravenshollow seal." And Margot, blind with triumph and too drunk on power to sense the cliff beneath her feet, threw back her head and laughed. "Don't be absurd. A sweeper with the Duke's ring? She stole it. Someone call the constable. Thief." The word was still hanging in the air when the bell above the door rang. Black boots crossed the threshold, and every person in Whitmore's grocery turned to see the Duke of Ravenshollow standing in the doorway. Chapter 4. The Duke of Ravenshollow did not rush. Powerful men never do. He stood in the doorway for one long moment, letting the silence do his talking, his dark coat still dusted with the speed of his ride, 2 estate guards and his steward Graves at his back. The word thief was still echoing off the shelves when his eyes swept the room and found what he was looking for. His wife, standing in the middle of the aisle with her apron half over her head, the signet ring glittering at her throat, surrounded by people who had just tried to throw her into the street. "Someone in this store," he said quietly, and quiet was somehow louder than shouting, just used the word thief. Mr. Hobbs nearly folded in half with bowing. "Your Grace, what an unexpected honor. We were just handling a small staffing matter." But Adrian walked past him as if he were furniture. Every footstep echoed on the floor Elena had swept that very morning. Customers pressed back against the shelves. Margot, still riding the last fumes of her triumph, actually stepped forward, eager to impress the most powerful man in the county. "Your Grace, thank heaven you're here. This cleaner has stolen a ring bearing your family's crest. I was just about to summon the constable." Adrian stopped in front of Elena. For a moment, the entire store held its breath as the Duke and the sweeper looked at each other. Then he reached out and gently lifted the ring from her collar, turning it in the light, and the softness in his eyes lasted just long enough for the sharpest observers to notice before it hardened into steel. "Stolen," he repeated, tasting the word. He turned to face the room. "This ring was not stolen. I placed it in her hands myself, on the morning I married her. You could have heard a pin drop into the spilled preserves. May I present Elena Blackwood, Duchess of Ravenshollow, my wife, and the owner, alongside me, of this store, this street, and every wage that has ever been paid beneath this roof." Daisy dropped the jar she was holding. Lady Fenwick sat down abruptly on a crate of onions without checking whether it was clean, and Margot Price made a sound like a kettle dying, her face draining from smug pink to gravestone white as 1 year of memories replayed behind her eyes. Every insult, every kicked bucket, every stolen wage, every time she had made a duchess kneel on a wet floor. The sweeper?" she whispered. "The sweeper," Elena said, and her voice was not cruel, which somehow made it more terrifying. "Who watched you take 2 shillings a week from a 14-year-old boy buying medicine for his mother? Who documented every crate of flour you sold out the back door? Who filed 12 complaints, Miss Price? You may know them better as the letters signed E. Then came the reckoning, and here is what made Elena a duchess worth the title. She measured justice like a pharmacist measures medicine, exact to the grain, no more and no less than each person had earned. For Margot, the architect of it all, there was no mercy, but there was law. You are dismissed, Adrian announced. Graves will audit every ledger you have ever touched. Every shilling you stole will be repaid to the staff with interest, or you will explain the difference to the magistrate. When Margot dropped to her knees and wailed that she never would have done it had she known who Elena was, the Duchess delivered the line that would be repeated in every kitchen and tavern in the county for years. That is what troubles me most, Miss Price. You should never need to know who someone is to treat them like a human being. For Mr. Hobbs, the man who saw nothing because looking was inconvenient, the punishment fit the crime of cowardice rather than cruelty. He was not dismissed. He was demoted to the stockroom, under the supervision of the very workers he had failed to protect, so that he could finally learn what happened in his own store from the bottom looking up. For Lady Fenwick, there was no sentence a court could give, so Elena gave a social one. She simply informed her, pleasantly, that the Duchess of Ravenshollow would remember exactly how she treated people she believed were beneath her. In a county ruled by invitations, that single sentence was a guillotine, and for the falsely accused, there was restoration. Tom the stockboy received his stolen wages back threefold, along with a standing order that the estate physician would see to his mother's care. Daisy, who had laughed along with Margot out of fear rather than malice, was given a warning and a second chance, because Elena knew the difference between a rotten heart and a frightened one. And Ruth, the girl who had whispered, "Don't let them get to you," who had worked unpaid shifts for a sick friend and never once bent her kindness to match the cruelty around her, was called forward in front of everyone. "You were kind when kindness cost you something," the Duchess told her. "That is the only qualification that matters. The floor is yours now, Miss Ruth." Somewhere near the door, the constable finally arrived, summoned by a frantic customer at the start of the chaos. He looked at the weeping ex-manager, the bowing director, and the Duchess in the faded grey dress, and wisely asked only one question. "Who am I taking?" The entire store pointed at Margot at the same time. Chapter 5. The story of what happened at Whitmore's grocery spread through the county faster than any fire ever could. By nightfall, every tavern was retelling it. By the end of the week, mothers were using it to teach their children, and shopkeepers found themselves looking twice at every cleaner, every stockboy, every quiet soul in worn shoes, wondering who they might truly be. That was Elena's real victory, greater than Margot's downfall and greater than any audit. She had planted a question in 10,000 minds. How do you treat people when you believe they are nobody? In the weeks that followed, Whitmore's grocery transformed. Wages rose for every worker, and pay envelopes were opened in the light, counted in full, witnessed by all. Ruth ran the floor the way Elena had swept it, with patience and fairness, and under her hand, the store became the busiest on Ashford Lane, because people will always travel farther to spend their money, in a place that feels warm. Tom's mother recovered by spring, and the boy who once cried over 2 missing shillings now trained new stock boys, telling each of them the story of the Duchess with the broom. Even Mr. Hobbs found something unexpected in the stockroom: humility, and eventually, the respect of the workers he had once ignored, earned crate by crate. But the strangest sight came every few weeks, when a fine carriage bearing the Ravenshollow crest would stop outside the store at dawn, and the Duchess herself would step down, trade her gloves for a familiar wooden handle, and sweep the front walk, while the town watched in wonder. When a visiting noblewoman once asked her, scandalized, why a duchess would stoop to such labor, Elena answered without pausing her strokes, "My lady, no honest work has ever lowered anyone. Only dishonest hearts do that." The broom itself, the same one she had used through that long, hard year, was never thrown away. Adrian had it mounted above the fireplace in the estate's great hall, between portraits of ancestors in gold and armor, and when guests asked why a common broom hung among treasures, the Duke would smile and say, "Because everything else in this room was inherited. That one was earned. And that is the heart of it, the truth this whole story was built to carry." Kindness that depends on status is not kindness at all. It is strategy wearing a mask. Margot bowed to titles and trampled the untitled, and it destroyed her, because character is not what you show to the powerful. It is what you do to the powerless when you believe no one important is watching. Ruth never knew she was being kind to a duchess. That is exactly why her kindness was worth a promotion. Lady Fenwick never knew she was sneering at one. That is exactly why her sneer cost her everything. Elena had walked into that store owning half the county and asked for nothing but the chance to hold a broom, and in doing so, she proved something the world keeps forgetting. Dignity is not stitched into silk, and worth is not engraved on rings. The most powerful woman on Ashford Lane spent a year being mocked, underpaid, and ordered to kneel, and she rose every single morning at 6 o'clock anyway, not because she had to, but because somewhere in that store, a boy was being robbed, a girl was being bullied, and somebody needed to be brave enough to write it all down. So remember the woman in the faded grey dress. The next time you pass someone the world has decided is invisible. They mocked her for sweeping the Duke's grocery store every morning, never imagining she owned the very ground beneath their feet. But the real lesson was never about the title she hid. It was about the character she couldn't hide. Because in the end, anyone can marry a duke, but not everyone can be the kind of person worth marrying when they think you're only a sweeper.